rationality is privileged over emotions. We've been taught for 4,000 years, wrongly as it turns out, that we are emotional beings, that we are rational beings, not emotional beings. And neuroscience is telling us exactly the opposite. We're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. This has some really significant repercussions. Number one, children are constantly and matter-of-factly emotionally invalidated by their parents, even by the most loving parents. They're told stuff like when they fall over and skin a knee, oh, don't cry, it doesn't hurt, don't be a sissy, don't be a girly girl, be a big boy. Big boys don't cry. And I've got a list 5 pages long of all the kinds of emotional invalidations that we're subjected to as children. What that teaches us is that emotions are bad, emotions are weak, emotions are evil, if you believe some theologians, like Augustine, Bishop of Hippo. And we are trained to, at a very young age, to block out emotions, to suppress them, especially negative emotions like anger, and to be afraid of them, and to become defensive when we're around other people. In other words, we are trained to be emotionally incompetent through our parents. And this has been going on for thousands of years, generation to generation to generation. And this emotional invalidation is the leading cause of addiction, depression, suicide, crime, and death by a number of really awful diseases like cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, obesity, and the list goes on and on and on. The science is absolutely irrefutable about this, and yet nobody knows it.
Hello and welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. We're here to help you navigate life while disrupting the status quo. Our discussions cover a number of topics relevant to everyday life. We discuss everything from relationships to entrepreneurship. We also engage in some difficult but important conversations. And now, here are your hosts, Brian and Tanya Hamilton.
Welcome to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. Today we are joined by Doug Noll. Doug, thanks for joining us today.
Guys, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here, especially because your audience will so resonate with what I talk about. It's really cool.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, no. But we'll start off the discussion by asking, who is Doug Noll?
Well, I am a rare breed. I am a lawyer turned peacemaker. Probably haven't heard of those before. I know it always gets upturned eyes. What? Like an oxymoron. So I grew up in Southern California. I didn't have an easy life as a child because I was born with a lot of disabilities. I was born almost blind, deaf, crippled, couldn't walk till I was 3 years old. But I was given the blessing of a very sharp mind. And once they figured out in the 4th grade that I needed glasses because my vision was 2400, I started doing well. And ultimately went to Dartmouth College and studied English literature, and then came back to California in the mid-70s and went to law school, worked for a judge for a year, and then went into private practice. And in that practice, the people that hired me wanted to turn me into a big-time trial lawyer, and that's exactly what they did. And I joined the firm in September of 1978 and tried my first jury trial in November of 1978. And from there on, for the next 22 years, I was a hardcore trial lawyer. All business and commercial cases, no personal injury, no divorce, anything, no criminal cases, but all big dollar, lots of money involved, big disputes. You know, many, many zeros running off the page. And so that's what I did. But what's interesting is that along the way, in the 80s, I took up the martial arts. And I became a first-degree black belt right around my 40th birthday. And a year later, was awarded my second-degree black belt. And at that time, my teacher called me in and said, I'm not going to teach you anymore. You are too aggressive. You're too full of yourself. You got to mellow out, dude. Go learn Tai Chi and don't come back until you... Right? Well, I was a pretty dutiful student, and I had no idea that that was a life-changing statement. First of all, you never master Tai Chi. So it was a death sentence in terms of getting any further in the martial arts. But I learned a lot about Tai Chi, and Tai Chi has two really interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the second is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. Did not get it. Did not compute at all. Hardcore trial lawyer, black belt, soft, vulnerable? You got to be kidding me. But I continued to study. And slowly the paradoxes seeped into me until one day in the late 1990s, I was trying a case, cross-examining somebody, and I was asked, the thought came to me out of the blue, what the heck am I doing in here? So that was a weird thought, straight thought in trial. But after the trial, I went on vacation and spent 10 days doing a whitewater trip up in central Idaho with a bunch of friends. And I spent the week really thinking about how many people I'd really served as a trial lawyer and concluded I hadn't served very many. And then from that concluded that I didn't want to go another 20 or 30 years and only serve 10 or 15 people. I mean, really, where I really helped them. So when I came back and was driving out of the mountains from my home in the central Sierra Nevada into town, I heard the one and only, as it turns out, the universe always provides in strange and mysterious ways, a public service announcement for a new master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And this was being offered at Fresno Pacific University, which is the West Coast Mennonite University. And it intrigued me. So I checked it out, and ultimately I enrolled. And so for 3 years, I was a full-time master's degree student. Hadn't been in graduate school for 22 years, so that was pretty interesting. And a three-quarters-time law professor at our local law school, and a full-time trial lawyer. And that was a pretty busy time for me. Over the course of my education as a peacemaker, I was exposed to a lot of very, very different ideas and taught by masters, people that most people have never heard of these guys, but they invented the concept of restorative justice. Restorative justice started at Fresno Pacific. And that's where the international restorative justice movement began. And so I got steeped in restorative justice, which is a way of approaching crime and offense, and also human conflict. And I saw immediately why I was so dissatisfied with the law. And I saw that the law has certain strengths, but people are asking too much of a system that's not designed to deal with human conflict. The legal system, both American and Canadian, are designed to resolve disputes by decision. But that doesn't mean there's going to be peace after the decision is made. And in fact, in my personal experience, I can't tell you how much money I wrote off from clients who I did a brilliant job for them in the courtroom, won the case, and they dinged me on my fees. They refused to pay my fees because why should I pay you for what the judge said was rightfully mine? I probably wrote off $3 or $4 million in fees.
Wow.
People just wouldn't pay me. That's part of the reason that drove me out. So lots of heated conversations. Fortunately, I was a peacemaker, a budding peacemaker, but lots of heated conversations. I wasn't heated, they were, with my partners. The last thing they wanted was their second biggest earning big dog trial lawyer to become some soft and woo-woo, touchy-feely peacemaker guy, ruin the reputation of the firm. I couldn't convince them that maybe this was a better way of doing a law practice. So I quit, 1 week's notice. Did everything I told my clients not to do. No savings, no business plan, no clue what I was going to do. I just walked out. I literally went in on a Monday, handed my keys, my cell phone, all my stuff, and said, I'm out of here on Friday. Bye.
Wow.
And they couldn't believe it. So for the rest of the week, people were rolling into, I won't go through the whole story. But anyways, I left. And it was the best decision I ever made in my life. And so then some really interesting things started to happen. Within about 8 months after I left, I was engaged to unravel $500 million real estate business partnership with some very prominent business people, and we successfully got it resolved. And that kind of made my bones. Everybody knew me as a trial lawyer, but now they said, wow, if he can work with those guys to get them to settle, he must be good. So I started getting a lot of business. And the next big thing that happened was in 2005, I was in a really difficult mediation. I get called into really difficult stuff that most mediators don't want to handle. Highly emotional, family business conflicts, corporate disputes, stuff where litigation's just not going to work. And in this case, without going into all the details, it was a divorced couple who were fighting over an $18,000 problem. They'd spent $50,000 in attorney's fees, right? Go figure. Typical. And they were so angry at each other that if there'd been knives in the room, there'd be blood on them. And I had no idea what to do. because I hadn't really been trained on how to de-escalate people. No one really had any good tools in those days for de-escalation. But I had been doing a lot of reading in neuroscience and been tutored by Professor John Noll at Caltech, a neuroscientist in Pasadena. And the thought finally came to me, listen to the emotions. And that's what I had them do. Instead of listening to their words, I had them listen to their emotions. And as soon as they got off the words and started focusing on the emotions, everything shifted. And by the time we were done, John, not his real name, of course, but John put his face in his hands and started sobbing for about 3 or 4 minutes. I mean, intense. And when he finally calmed down and blew his nose and cleaned up, he looked across the table at Susan and said, "That's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years."
Wow.
They settled the case instantly, walked out holding hands, and had lunch with each other. And you could have picked my jaw up with a forklift off. I've never seen anything like it. But that was the beginning. And then in 2007, Matthew Lieberman and his team at UCLA, he's a neuroscientist at UCLA, came out with a brain scanning study that described exactly what this process is. It's called affect labeling. And he actually we have the science to show, well, this is why it works. And this is why everything else doesn't work, but this really does. So I began to teach it. And I was getting a lot of pushback because people still thought this emotional stuff was touchy-feely, woo-woo, way outside the box. Nobody wanted to talk about it. And then the next big thing that happened was in 2010, I got a call from my colleague and dear friend, Laurel Coffer. And from that call, we started the Prison of Peace Project. We were called to go into the largest, most violent women's prison in the world and train lifers, murderers mostly, how to become peacemakers and mediators to stop the prison violence. That's what they were asking for. It took us 6 months to get permission to start, but in April of 2010, we started with 15 women, and it was an astounding success. So for 3 years, we worked in that prison, and then it was repurposed to a men's prison. When the men came in, we started it all over again from scratch and trained the men, and then finally in 2017, we started getting funding from the state, because up until that time, it was all pro bono. And we ended up pre-pandemic in 15 California prisons, a prison in Connecticut, and 15 prisons in Greece. And what is so cool is that we now have a startup in Italy, and I'm going to be talking with those people on Thursday. Super exciting. And we've spent this whole pandemic, this last summer, filming our entire curriculum so that by the end of the year, when we get out of post-production, we're going to be able to offer Prison of Peace, the curriculum, to anybody in the world that wants to train inmates, incarcerated people, how to be peacemakers and mediators. Super exciting.
That's very exciting.
Along the way, I wrote a best-selling book called De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. It's now in 4 languages and second printing, and, I mean, I have nothing better to do, right? So I've taken, today, of course, I'm still doing all of it. I'm 70 years old and feel like I'm like 40.
That's great.
I'm, teaching people these skills, these de-escalation skills, because not only do these skills teach you how to calm people down, but it also teaches you how to become emotionally incompetent without any extra effort. All you have to do is do the practice, and you will change everything in your life. And it's just amazing to me to watch the transformations that go on when people learn these skills. It's incredible. So that is kind of a long-winded but short version of Doug Noll.
When I saw that you're working with these inmates, male and female, and able to, de-escalate them in 90 seconds. I'm like, okay, if you can do that, share and teach us and tell us how we can do that, with ourselves, with our kids, in these really, I guess, stressful, high crisis situations sometimes. So like when people get to that stage, what would be the first thing you would say to them to stop and, I guess, start de-escalating, if that makes sense?
Okay, Tonya. So without explaining what I'm going to do, and I will explain it.
Okay.
I'm just going to de-escalate you. I want you to think of a time when you got pretty upset and angry.
Okay.
Okay. And just tell us very briefly just what happened.
Probably something with the kids not listening, that kind of stuff.
So there was a situation a day or two ago when your kids were not listening to you, and you had your hands full doing a whole bunch of other stuff, and you really needed them to present, mindful, and obedient. Mm-hmm. And they didn't, and you got really angry and frustrated. You felt unappreciated, felt unsupported, you felt ignored, totally disrespected, and you were really anxious. because you were at wit's end about what to do with the kids, and it made you sad. You felt sad that your children just in that moment were not being the people that you knew they could be. And you were kind of at wit's end about what to do and very concerned and confused. And the whole thing just really pissed you off.
Yep.
So,
You got it.
So how do you feel now about it?
It's interesting, right? Because while it's going on or afterwards, that's when you start to think all those things that you just said, right? Maybe not all of them, but you start to process. And it's like, well, why in that moment before I raised my voice or, sent people to the room, why didn't I stop then? But I guess it's when you're in that moment.
All right.
There's no processing sometimes for people.
The reason that there are a couple of things that are going on here. First of all, we live in a culture, all of us in North America live in a culture where rationality is privileged over emotions. We've been taught for 4,000 years, wrongly as it turns out, that we are emotional beings, that we are rational beings, not emotional beings. And neuroscience is telling us exactly the opposite. We're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. This has some really significant repercussions. Number one, children are constantly and matter-of-factly emotionally invalidated by their parents, even by the most loving parents. They're told stuff like when they fall over and skin a knee, oh, don't cry, it doesn't hurt, don't be a sissy, don't be a girly girl, be a big boy. Big boys don't cry. And I've got a list 5 pages long of all the kinds of emotional invalidations that we're subjected to as children. What that teaches us is that emotions are bad, emotions are weak, emotions are evil, if you believe some theologians, like Augustine, Bishop of Hippo. And we are trained to, at a very young age, to block out emotions, to suppress them, especially negative emotions like anger, and to be afraid of them, and to become defensive when we're around other people. In other words, we are trained to be emotionally incompetent through our parents. And this has been going on for thousands of years, generation to generation to generation. And this emotional invalidation is the leading cause of addiction, depression, suicide, crime, and death by a number of really awful diseases like cancer, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, diabetes, obesity, and the list goes on and on and on. The science is absolutely irrefutable about this, and yet nobody knows about it because only the scientists talk to scientists. It doesn't get out into the public. So when we get angry ourselves, if we're not trained, and I'm going to train you here in a minute, if you're not trained, you get into a condition known as alexithymia, Alexithymia. And alexithymia is a big word, but basically it means you're no longer able to feel or express your emotion. When you become alexithymic, your prefrontal cortex shuts down completely dominated by the neural circuits of your emotions in your brain, and you have no control over what's going on. You are basically at the mercy of whatever programming was pumped into you by your parent and other adults when you were a child, and you're going to revert back to when you became emotionally stuck. So to answer your question, Tonya, when your kids were misbehaving and you got really upset at them, that triggered you back to where you got stuck probably, and you could no longer be a thinking person because your emotions were dominating your whole being. And that's what happens with everybody. Because our educational system so focuses on rationality. By the way, I teach graduate school. I teach a course called Decision Making Under Stress and Uncertainty. I asked my graduate students, what is rationality? Nobody knows what rationality is. It's just this word. It's the other word that really drives me crazy is social justice. That word drives me nuts too, for reasons that go far beyond our conversation. But we don't even know what rationality is. But the truth is, if there is such a thing as rationality, which I'm not sure there is, but if there is such a thing as rationality, we can't be rational unless we're emotional. What all this means is we have to learn how to deal with emotions, and it's really simple. It's so simple. It's ridiculous. And yet, because of this bias against emotions and the lack of neuroscience up until 2007, when Lieberman's study came out, people just blow it off. So here's how we do it. How old are your kids?
12, 9. We have twins that are 9 and 5.
Oh my God, twins at 9. What a handful. All right, great. They're all still amenable. So here's the trick, and it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with a 2-year-old or a 40-year-old who's acting like a 2-year-old. Same thing. The brain responds to this automatically and unconsciously. The first thing you're going to do with an angry person or an upset person, and it could be any kind of upset. It could be grief, it could be sadness, it could be happy, it could be positive too. It doesn't matter what the emotions are. The first thing you're going to do is ignore the words for the next minute, maybe 90 seconds. Anything that comes out of their mouth is white noise. You're not even going to listen to it. You're going to completely ignore it. Now, you're not going to ignore the person, but you're going to ignore their words. So if you're dealing with your 5-year-old and your 5-year-old is having a little bit of a tantrum, you're not going to try to rationalize with that child. You're not going to try to explain it. In fact, what you're going to do is just ignore everything that kid's saying. Same thing with your 12-year-old or your twins. Ignore it. Completely ignore it. This does two things. One, you stay in control of your prefrontal cortex because you're not going to get triggered. Two, it frees up bandwidth so that you can do the next two steps. So very, very important. Ignore the words. Second step, you're going to read the emotions. Sometimes I say read the emotional data fields that are coming off. Let's again use your children. They're coming off your children. So your 5-year-old is really angry and upset and frustrated and mad and tired and just not having a good day. And what you will do is just sit in silence inside yourself and let your brain process all of the emotions that your child is experiencing. And guess what? This is automatic, it's unconscious, preconscious, and it is effortless. We are hardwired for reading other people's emotions. This goes all the way back to evolutionary biology, how we evolved as hominids. Millions of years of evolution have developed this skill in us. But because we privilege rationality over emotions, we never really learn how to use this skill. So we are going to just sit in silence, and then all of a sudden the emotions you'll start to feel them or experience them in your conscious. And then you'll do the third step, which is reflect back the emotions with a simple you statement. So you'll say, what's your 5-year-old's name?
Asher.
Okay, so you would say something like, Asher, you're really frustrated. You're really mad. Nobody's listening to you. You feel completely ignored. Nobody's listening to you. You feel completely disrespected. You're sad. Nobody loves you. You feel completely abandoned and alone. And the whole thing's just really making you mad. So notice what I did. You statements only, no I statements.
I was going to say.
No I statements. That is bad psychology. It came out of the 1960s by a guy by the name of Thomas Gordon. And he had the right ideas, but he did it the wrong way. And unfortunately, it stuck. And even today, in mediation training and psychology training, people are still being trained to use I statements. Totally wrong. Will not work, never has worked, never will work. And there's a whole bunch of science why that is. So you use a you statement. And then you start with the emotion that presents, so it might be anger, and just recognize that if it's anger, there's always going to be 4 or 5 or 6 other emotions underneath. And with training, you learn about layers of emotions and how to layer the emotions in, and that's just learning the skill set. So you're going to start with these emotions, and all you're going to do is reflect the emotions, and then maybe Asher will say more, and so you just reflect more emotions until finally he'll do exactly what you did, Tonya. You'll say, yeah, exactly. As soon as they give you that verbal response, nod their heads, you see the relaxation, you have de-escalated. Now, you may not be done because it may be that you have to deal with some consequences and impose some discipline or a discussion about a learning lesson. But here's what I tell parents. Never, ever, ever discipline a child when the child is emotionally upset because the teaching will not take. The only way we learn is through emotion. We can only learn stuff if we're calm. If you've got a child who's frustrated or angry or tired or stressed or feels ignored or abandoned or unloved, and kids feel this all the time, totally not true, but that's just their experience in the moment. If you don't de-escalate that child's brain, any kind of consequence you want to impose or discipline is just going to be raw punishment, and all the child knows is, I hate me, and everybody hates me. It's that emotional invalidation that is so destructive of a child's brain. So the 3 steps are, ignore the angry words, listen to the emotions, reflect back the emotions with a simple you statement. No I statements, no questions. You would never say, Asher, are you angry? He's alexithymic. There's no way he knows that he's angry. So you're asking him to do something that's impossible. Have you ever asked somebody who's really angry whether or not they're angry or not? And what happened?
Of course
they got angrier.
Yeah.
Because you weren't listening to them. The reason you ask a question or use an I statement or emotionally validate is to soothe your own anxiety around their emotion. And the moment you stop being selfish, about soothing yourself at the expense of the other person is when you can bring peace to the room within 45 to 90 seconds. And that's the secret. It works with kids. It works with people in prison. It works with the Congressional Budget Office in Washington, D.C. I taught them how to de-escalate members of Congress. They love that. It works on any human brain anywhere in the world because we all have the same basic structure, physiological structure. It doesn't matter what the culture is, doesn't matter what the language is, it still works. And it works every single time without fail. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you did mention that it does work for people of any age.
Yes.
Can you share with us how you've seen this? And this is just very curious to me, how you've seen this play out in the prison environment and how you trained people who in many cases were murderers. I think you'd have to be pretty angry to get to that point where you do something that's going to put you in prison for the rest of your life.
That's right.
How does it work in that environment?
In one word, amazing. So in the Prison of Peace curriculum that Laurel and I devised, and it's obviously evolved over the last 12 years, the very first set of skills we teach our students is what we call the 4 levels of reflective listening, because you can't be a peacemaker unless you can listen first. And so the 4 levels of reflective listening are mirroring, where you repeat back word for word what another person is saying. Totally never used for de-escalating people or any kind of listening at all. It's only used so that for lists, recipes, procedures, so that both the speaker and the listener know exactly what's going to happen. That's the only time you use mirroring. Paraphrasing, which we're all familiar with, where you basically are restating what the person said in your own words, but it's still focused on the words. Core messaging, which is focused on the meaning, not the words. We're starting to get away from the words right now. So we've all had the experience of being in the presence of somebody who they're like a little bunny rabbit going all around through the forest, right? You never know, where is he going? Where is she going? What time is it? Come on, get to the point, right? We use core messaging in that situation because typically what's happening is somebody is trying to figure out what they mean to say, and so they're just spewing out stuff, hoping that they'll stumble on their meaning. But as listeners can listen, and we can oftentimes ascertain what they're trying to say, what their meaning is, and we just give them a meaning in a very short sentence. Oh, you're so frustrated you feel like a volcano about to explode. That's a core message and an affect label. And then the last level is affect labeling, where we're going to ignore the words completely and just focus on the emotions and reflecting back the emotions. So I'll just tell you the first stories back in 2010. 15 women, all kinds of ethnicities. We had white, black, Hispanic, Pacific Islanders, ages 30 to 65, education from high school to graduate school, all in because somebody died at their hands in one way or another. For the first 4 weeks, they were like blackthorns, emotionally repressed, emotionally unavailable, obviously angry and unhappy. And then in the 5th week, we showed up, and it was like, where do those blackthorns go? Well, all we have in front of us are beautiful roses. They had refound their humanity through their practices, because we have them practice a lot and reflect on their practices. And as they were learning how to listen to the emotions of other people in their community, they were learning how to listen to their own emotions. I'll tell you one other quick story. Same group of women. This is week 5, in fact, before we saw the roses. We got there early, and there was one of our students was in room that we had been assigned to, and she was in the corner where it was a little dark and kind of sobbing a little bit. So we walked over, and Laurel knelt next to her and said, "Sarah, what's going on?" And Sarah told us the story. She said, "I've been in prison for 18 years. I am in prison because I killed a family of 4 as a drunk, and I came out of the wreck without a scratch on me. I was sentenced to 25 to life and had to give up my 3-year-old boy to my sister to raise. I've written him a letter every single week since I've come to prison, and I've never, he doesn't want to talk to me on the phone. He doesn't come for visits, doesn't write me. Anything I've ever learned about him is through my sister." Well, a couple of days ago, I decided to write a letter based on what you guys were teaching me about how to listen to emotions. And I thought about all of the feelings and emotions he must have, the anger and the rage and the frustration, the humiliation and embarrassment. He must be and the abandonment, because I did abandon him. And I wrote this long letter. All I did was reflect what I thought he might have been experiencing for the last 18 years. He's 21 now. And this morning, I got my first letter. And it was very angry. I mean, he had a right to be angry. He has every right in the world to be angry at me. But at the bottom, he said, I'm bringing my girlfriend. We'll come visit you in a couple of weeks. I love you, Mom. And then she started to weep again.
Wow.
And that's when I knew that the power of what we were teaching was going to be mind-boggling. And since that time, you know, we've trained thousands and thousands of incarcerated people how to be peacemakers and mediators. None of our people who have been released on parole have ever reoffended. We have zero recidivism. They have stopped gang riots. They've stopped fights, murders, argument. I mean, we got letters from wardens saying there's no more violence in this prison or on this yard because of prison of peace. Really quite remarkable. And as you all noted in the beginning, if I can train a murderer to be a peacemaker and teach them how to listen to emotion, imagine what I can do for you folks.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that, you know, being in jail and stuff. These ladies, if they're learning this, you know, putting it into practice, right? I mean, I've never been obviously in jail, but you watch some of these shows and it's interesting how things can go from 0 to 100, right? So fast. I mean, that's for anybody, but I'm specifically dealing with the people in jail, right? So
Right.
to actually see that and see them put into play what it is they've learned, you know, that speaks volumes right there.
It's incredibly powerful.
Mhm.
And it's changed lives. All but of those 15 women, all but 2 have been released.
Wow.
And they are doing amazing on the outside. They've gone back to college, gotten careers. Some of them had children, gotten married. I mean, it's mind-boggling, really. And it's just not the women, because we've seen the same results. We've trained far more men now than we've trained women, because there are only a couple of women's prisons in California. But we got exactly the same results with the men. And I was working pre-pandemic. I was working at Corcoran State Prison, which is one of the 2 maximum security prisons in California. I mean, this is hardcore. I was teaching 100 feet from Charles Manson's cell before he died, and teaching guys coming out of gangs who are all violent, had violent histories, teaching them all how to be peacemakers and mediators. And I just got a letter today the other day from one of them. He's up for parole and wanted me to write a letter of endorsement for him, which I happily did. He's an amazing man, and he's devoting himself to prison of peace.
So the course, how long is it for the people incarcerated?
It's 84 hours of total training, typically spread over a year. We used to do it, knock it out in like 14 weeks, but that just was too much. So now we spread it out over a year, and our model today is to go in and get a cadre of 20 to 25 students. And out of that group, we hope to get 10 or 15 who want to become trainers. And we immediately start training them to be trainers from the very beginning. We take them through the first workshop, which is called the Circle Keeper Workshop. And they're usually hooked pretty quickly. And then there's always a group of them that feel the call to serve. And then we take them and we train them. And the way we train them is they'll now sit as mentors. We'll teach another Circle Keeper workshop. They will watch and observe and watch more about how we teach as opposed to the material. And they'll learn more about the material. And then we will take them through a very rigorous train the trainer program, which is hundreds of hours. And ultimately they'll start teaching the Circle Keeper workshop. And then when we have enough students who have graduated in the Circle Keeper workshop, we then do the Peacemaker workshop, which is very advanced. Neuroscience. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in it. Stuff you need to know as a mediator and peacemaker.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll bring the trainers up behind us. So now they'll start teaching the Peacemaker workshop. And then finally, when we have enough peacemakers that have been certified, then we'll do the mediation workshop. And we'll take all of those students, including our trainers, and we will train them through a 3-day mediation workshop with a couple of follow-up sessions. And at the end, if they do the homework, they have to do 5 mediations and observe 2 and write them up. And we have very strict criteria about what we're looking for. Then we certify them, and they become certified licensed prison of peace mediators. The training that we give these people in these institutions is more than twice what is required to be a mediator, a court annexed mediator on the outside, both in Canada and in the United States. They get more than twice the hours and quite a bit deeper training than a typical person would get, going into either a community mediation center or court annexed mediation or even a university mediation, over twice, and much, much, much deeper. Pretty cool.
Very.
Yeah, very. Now, my thought is, as you're teaching all of this, why wait until someone is already in prison? Have you had any conversations about teaching this in in schools or anything of that nature? And what have those talks been like?
I actually was engaged to introduce this to a high school and the feeder middle schools when Fresno Unified School District was moving towards a restorative practices philosophy for discipline. And from my perspective, I never received so many emails from teachers saying this is the most important, best training they'd ever received in their entire career. And I finished the engagement, and I taught probably 200 teachers how to do this, and I never heard from the school district again. School districts are so overwhelmed by so many different competing problems. I mean, just think about the mask mandate, right?
Yeah.
You're in Texas or Florida, you're screwed if you're administrator or teacher. But then there was the teacher in Florida, who didn't wear a mask and got half her class sick with COVID. So it's a mess. And so the school district is being pulled in millions of different directions. And although this is core fundamental, it really should be taught to teach to students in college who are becoming teachers, but they're not ready yet. And the professors that teach in educational institutions where they're teaching in the education departments are all rationalists. And they don't want to get their fingers dirty in neuroscience and the biology and physiology of peace and conflict. And so what happens is we just perpetuate the system. Even though the teachers that learned these skills and applied them never had a discipline problem again in any classroom they ever presided over. Never. In fact, the students who were the most problematic became the most loyal students and sort of became the enforcers in the classroom. And that happened over and over and over again. School districts don't have the bandwidth for something radical like this. And this is radical. It's very different. And they just don't have the bandwidth. I completely agree with you. If teachers learned how to do this, their lives would be so much better, and their students' lives would be so much better. But more importantly, I want parents to learn it. It all starts in the home, and 96% of families are emotionally dysfunctional. From Virginia Satir, who was one of the first family therapists in the 1970s and 80s. And it's the cycle of emotional invalidation. And if we can break that cycle and validate our children's feelings and emotions by using this three-step process, well, I'll let the research speak for itself. The studies show that when you label a child's emotions starting at about 3 or 4 years old, you shouldn't really be starting it much earlier, but let's just say 3 or 4 years old, the longitudinal study showed that by the time they were 9 and 10 years old, they were 3 grade levels ahead of their peers. Just because their parents were emotionally validating them and not invalidating. I mean, there's so much science out there that supports all this work, but we're stuck in 4,000 years of rotten thinking around rationality. And so we're afraid of emotion. They scare us because we've never been trained how to be emotionally confident.
I appreciate what you say there, because I mean, so many of the conversations we have on this podcast are all things, we ask, why do you think it's not being taught in school? Like so many of the topics we discuss. And, I totally get it. Like there's only so much, the schools and the teachers, have time for. But when you say that, like it really should be happening in the home. I really appreciate that part. Right now, that's a lot for a parent to take on, but you know what? Learning and investing, everybody's going to invest in different things. You want to invest in this and your child being able to, regulate, themselves, their emotions as adults and all that kind of stuff for parents, there is going to be a benefit to it in the long run.
You're absolutely right. And it's not that difficult. I did my first in-person workshop in 2 years to a corporate group, to their management team up in Sacramento, which is about 200 miles north of here. And I never do a workshop without follow-up. In other words, you can't hire me to come in and just teach this stuff and then I disappear. I say, nope, we're going to do at least 1 or 2 follow-ups. So we did a follow-up on Zoom 3 weeks later, and 2 men, this is a trucking firm, and they brought me in to teach their managers how to de-escalate truck drivers.
I could see that being a necessary skill.
I had 2 men, both of them senior managers in their early 40s, I'd say, and they both had 5-year-old boys. And they both said the same story. I started affect labeling, or I started listening to my 5-year-old boy's emotions, and all I did is reflect back what he was feeling. And this was 3 weeks ago when I started, when you came and taught us. He's a completely changed human being. He's more mature. He's more present. In 3 weeks, he's able to control his emotions. Now he's going around affect labeling his mother and his other siblings. He said, it's unbelievable. He's a completely different boy. And the other guy said, I had exactly the same experience. I started affect labeling my little 5-year-old, and 3 weeks later, he's completely changed. I've gotten emails from parents saying that we had a horrible, terrible twos problem. There's no such thing as the terrible two. I can swing back on that. But let me just say, we started affect labeling our little 2-year-old who had a lot of meltdowns and a lot of tantrums. And within 4 months, gone. Never had a tantrum again, ever.
Wow.
Gone forever. What parents don't realize, because we don't teach people how to be parents, really stupid. We invest nothing, our society invests nothing in parenting, and we just assume that people are going to figure it out, and they don't figure it out. They do a very poor job at it for the most part. And all you got to do is look around at the polarization that exists right now. And that, I mean, that's Plaintiff's Exhibit 1 on this. But if we were able to teach parents how to de-escalate little children, the parents would be calmer because they wouldn't get upset or angry when the child gets emotional. The child would develop much, much faster, develop emotional maturity much faster. We'd see incredible growth academically and intellectually because the emotions and the intellect all have to grow together. And if you don't grow those emotions, if you are a disciplinarian as a parent or an authoritarian as a parent and not an emotional coach, that important part, the most important part of what it means to be human is the emotional centers of the brain. And if we're not coaching our kids how to deal with their emotions, we're like cutting off 98% of who they are. And if we could just invest in parents and get them to do these skills, it's not hard to learn. It doesn't take much effort. It's really simple, and all it takes is a little bit of practice. You know, most people can master this in 3 or 4 weeks with just a little practicing it 3 times a week. It's like nothing. And once you start doing it, it becomes self-affirming because you see the results right away. And you say, oh my God. I mean, this going back to prison, I cannot tell you how many inmates came up to me and said, if I had known these skills 20 years ago, I wouldn't be in prison.
Absolutely.
It's trying to get as many people as possible to hear this and get interested in learning these skills because they will change their lives. But more importantly, they will grow really healthy, thriving children in ways they couldn't even imagine. And they will not tolerate, once they learn this stuff, there's a little bit of a negative. You, as a parent, once you learn how to emotionally validate, you will absolutely not tolerate any kind of emotional invalidation of any child ever again. And you'll become outraged when in the grocery store some mom is slapping a baby around because the baby's screaming. You'd probably be outraged by that anyways. But the emotional invalidation that you see, and grandparents or aunts and uncles, anybody who emotionally invalidates your children are going to get a tongue lashing, a nice from you. But
a peaceful tongue lashing.
That's not how we treat our children here. We do not tell them to stop crying. We do not tell them that they're sissies. We do not tell them that big boys don't cry. We do not say that. We listen to their emotions and we reflect back until they're calmed down. And then if they need more help, we'll give it to them. But most of the time they don't. Most of the time they're pretty good. And that's how you need to treat these children as well when you're in our presence. And it's just slowly spreads. Ripples in a pond.
It's really important as a parent. And, you know, while you were saying this, I quickly looked up a quote because I didn't want to paraphrase it. I'm very good at misquoting people. So I wanted to make sure I got this one right. But it's a Frederick Douglass quote. It is easier to build strong children than repair broken men.
Exactly correct. The way I put it, along a similar vein, murderers are not born; they're bred.
Mm-hmm.
No baby is born as a murderer. They're bred that way by their family. I'll never forget one guy in Corcoran. I said, "So what was it like growing? What was the emotional atmosphere in your family?" He said, "There was only one emotion in my family. It was hatred. You know, wow. If you just live in hatred all your life, what are you going to do? You're going to end up in a gang." Where you can have some attachment and you're going to end up killing people.
Have you ever had somebody who was born, was raised in a home where, they were able to share their emotions and, was a healthy home? And did they give the reason as to where that switch came?
I have really never met anybody who grew up in a home where they were emotionally validated. Almost everybody that I've taught, and I've taught tens of thousands of people, without exception, grew up in a dysfunctional home. It was okay to be happy, but it was not okay to be angry. Mom and Dad could get angry, but we couldn't get angry. If we got angry at the dinner table, we were sent away. Worst thing you can do. How do you teach kids to manage strong emotions unless they have strong emotions that they've got to learn how to manage?
True.
And if you shut down those strong emotions, they're never going to learn how to manage them. They're going to repress them and suppress them and become emotionally defended, and they're not going to be able to have intimacy, and they're going to have crummy relationships as adults because they haven't learned how to master their emotions when they're supposed to from 3 to 6 years old. I guess I get a little passionate about this, but I've seen too many people in prison that don't belong there because they were abused by their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and you have good reason to be passionate about it because, again, it's just it's an important message, and it's important for us to learn as well, whether it's just as a parent, whether it's in the workplace. Like these are skills that you can use everywhere.
That's right. They're universal. It's the foundational skill of life. And I'm expecting you guys to try this out on your 5-year-old, your twins, and your 12-year-old, and email me and say, this is what happened. And for anybody in the audience who's listening to this, well, I'll give you a link in a minute where you can go learn more about this, but email me, doug@dougnoll.com. And I want to hear the stories about how you listened your children into existence. I call this, all of this is called listening others into existence. Can you listen your children into existence? And when you do, watch the magic unfold. It's amazing.
Now, I know we've hit on a lot of things. There's even more stuff I would have loved to cover, but I know we're up against time here. But
it kind of always ends up, these conversations are just so interesting. And of course, obviously, I can talk about this stuff for hours. And, you know, we just really skipped over, we got the main points across, but there's just so much more to learn. And the science is so fascinating about all this stuff. This is all based on science. It's not based on psychology. I am not a big fan of psychology or psychologists. They offer some things, but mostly they're rooted in old thinking that has never been empirically established to be valid. Freud, you know, Freud was a genius, but there is nothing of his work has ever been empirically validated by any kind of scientific study. It's all speculation. And yet there's a whole edifice of psychoanalysis built on a database of 14 middle-class, middle-aged, upper-middle-class, middle-aged Viennese women, his patients. And he did a whole theory of mind and wrote dozens of books, all based on his observations of these 14 women, not men. Heaven forbid, men should have emotions. Men are rational, women are emotional. I mean, he was so sexist. Anyway, so it's science-based, and I don't teach anything that isn't science-based. And so I always tell people, well, here are my papers. Where are yours? I'll show you mine if you show me yours. No one can come up with it because there aren't any. I know. I've done, I've read over 4,000 studies and, 300 books, and stay up with literature. And I just know what's out there and what's not out there. And these psychologists, they're not interested in neuroscience. Crazy. Oh, well.
I want to switch gears because the other thing too, there's a lot of things, but the other thing that kind of sticks out that's really interesting about your story is the adversity that you had early on. You said, you were born nearly deaf, nearly blind. You had some significant challenges that way. I guess going through all of that, what were some of the things that you learned that you could share with us that could maybe serve as motivation for people who are in, similar circumstances?
I had so many bad teachers that I swore to myself that if I ever taught, and I ended up being a teacher of all kinds of different things, I would never teach the way that I was taught. Mm-hmm. People were impatient with me. I was left-handed, crippled, blind. So we tried Little League Baseball. I couldn't do that. Couldn't run, couldn't see. And there was not one adult coach out there who wanted to ever take the time to even show me how to throw a ball or catch and work with me because I had the disabilities. Same thing with tennis, although I ultimately became a tennis player many years later. All through childhood, if you weren't perfect in those days, physically perfect, then you were nobody. And nobody wanted to, and left-handed, that was bad enough in the 1950s. And so I swore to myself that if I ever started teaching, I would never teach the way that all these adults were not teaching me. They just didn't have the patience. So I ended up becoming a ski instructor, level 3 certified ski instructor. I ended up being a whitewater rafter and a rock climber and a fly fisherman and an airplane pilot and a helicopter pilot and a secondary black belt and a Tai Chi master and I've taught a lot of these skills to people. But what I've learned is how to have patience and how to break things down to the how. Why when I teach people how to de-escalate, it's not about the what, it's about the how. Here's how you do it. Do it exactly this way and watch the results. And don't take my word for it, experiment. So that's what really, it was very painful. My mother's 93 years old and still alive and doing well. And we talk about it. She said, you had a rough childhood and we had no idea what to do with you. And in those days it was Dr. Spock, spare the rod, spoil the child. So we were very harsh, and that was a mistake. But we didn't know it, and they were correct. It took me 50 years to finally start getting over all of the problems I had as a child. And only in the last 20 years have I really felt authentic and present and whole and happy, really happy, amazingly happy.
It's interesting because there's been a few conversations I've had lately where, people have been talking about, "Oh, I wish my parents would have picked this up in me." And then now as adults, you're dealing with like different diagnosis and stuff. And I look back and I think some parents, when you were growing up, even for us in like the 80s, they just, it wasn't as prevalent. The information maybe wasn't as easy to get at, and people maybe weren't even thinking about it either. But I really believe like right now, as much as the world is going crazy, right now is a great time to be a child growing up. And for parents, like everything is right there at our fingertips, right? Like if you want to have your child, assessed or looked at, it's just all right there. And it's something easy to do. It's not, if there's a diagnosis, it's not something that's, a shun to your child. Whereas back in, the 60s and things like that, it would have been, right? Like
Right.
it's there. Here's the diagnosis. Let's move forward. There's so many different programs and different things like that out there right now. So I've really been thinking about that lately, that, what, out of all the years, our parents, everybody tried their best in the years, that they were in. But right now, we really do have all the services we need at our fingertips.
There's a lot more resources now than
Mhm.
ever before, especially with the internet. And so young parents have a lot more available to them than their parents or people like me who might be grandparents would have. However, I am finding that children are being way overdiagnosed with stuff that they are not suffering from. They're suffering from emotional invalidation, and they're being diagnosed based on behaviors that are nothing more than reflections of how they're being treated emotionally by their parents. Even the most loving parent. You can be the most loving parent in the world and provide for everything, but if you're emotionally invalidating your child, you're going to have behavioral problems. And it's going to show up as ADD or ADHD or all kinds of other things. And so I worry about the overdiagnosis. So it's a blessing and a curse. We have a lot of resources, but then we have a lot of people who want to make money off of pain and suffering, and so they tend to do their professional thing and look through their very narrow lens, and that can be detrimental.
Mhm.
Parents have a tough act. I mean, they've got a lot to work with.
That's
Yeah.
one thing. It doesn't get easier.
No.
Again, going back in the 50s to now, yes, we're still dealing with children, and yes, the information is there, but it definitely doesn't get easier. Each parent goes through, for
No.
sure.
But I will guarantee you guys that if you start listening to your children's emotions and reflecting them back, you will see a radical transformation within the next 3 to 4. Radical. And expect you to email me. Tell me. I
There you
collect.
go.
Oh yeah, absolutely we will. Now, I'm curious. It's I feel like when you're telling me everything that you've done, everything that you accomplished, based on based on the last question I asked you, I feel like I'm talking to the guy who should be in the next round of Dos Equis commercials, because you've done so much interesting stuff. But what's on the horizon for you?
Well, I'm 70 years old, so going on 50. I think now we're going to, Prison of Peace is going to continue post-pandemic and hopefully we can internationalize Prison of Peace. That's a big deal. Professionally, I want to continue reaching out and trying to teach as many people as I can these de-escalation skills or listening other people into existence. I think that's really my life calling right now. And I want to try to shift our consciousness around emotions from emotions are bad and evil and weak to emotions are our hidden genius. And we really need to devote time, effort, and energy into becoming emotionally competent. Not emotionally intelligent, emotionally competent. You can't learn emotional intelligence. That's another big lie. But you can learn emotional competence. And I want to devote my efforts to teaching as many people as possible.
Now, I'll kind of wrap up here by asking, for anybody who wants to learn more about all of the work that you're doing, where can we contact you? What's your preferred method of people reaching out?
Well, people can even reach me by email at doug@dougnoll.com, but I created a special web page for you guys on my website for this show and for your audience. And the URL is Doug Noll, DougNoll.co/disrupt. And when you go to that page, I have free stuff, inexpensive stuff, moderately expensive stuff, and then the golden Cadillac, of course. if you really want to get the big deal. And so people can select, and it'll also give you give everybody an entree onto my website. I have dozens and dozens of articles and links to all kinds of resources. So the website is quite extensive in terms of all of this stuff, and everybody will find something that can be of use to them. And there's contact forms on the website. You can sign up for my email list if you want. And the point being that I'm trying to make this information available to people, recognizing that people come at this from all different levels of socioeconomic status and a willingness and ability to learn and willingness and ability to grow. And so I try to meet people where they are. So it's dougnoll.co/disrupt. And that's probably the best and easiest way to learn more about me. You can always Google me too. I got too many Google pages out there. More about me than I know about myself.
Doug, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate your time, and I hope we can do this again, because I feel like we only really scratched the surface.
We can absolutely do this again. And for people who are listening to this, if you are interested in all of this, then you need to contact Brenda and Sonia and let them know that you like this show, so they know what kind of guests that you want to hear. People like me only appear because audiences say they like listening to it, and so you got to give the feedback to get the information.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate it. I am definitely going to be trying this out. So
try it out on the kids. I would be careful. Work with the kids for a while before you do it on each other.
It's good call.
I typically tell married people, I say, don't do this in your relationship until you've got some skill level at it. Now, since you both were here and got the basics, you probably could practice it with each other. And the way I would do it is doing it the same way I did it with Tonya, where I just tell it, one person tells a story, and the other person, hey there, and the other person just reflects and practice that. That must be the 5-year-old.
Yeah, this is Asher.
Hey, Asher, I love the hat.
His first day of school hat.
First day of school hat, kindergarten. Wow, exciting.
Oh man.
Hey, Asher, you look kind of shy, Asher.
Oh, he can do that, but he can also be quite outgoing.
Asher's happy. He's smiling. You're smiling. Yeah. Happy and excited and a little shy and a little not so sure, a little not so sure about who this guy is. Huh?
There you go. And on that note.
Mommy, why is it right there and then and near?
Oh, so we can see.
Yeah, it's so that we can see everything. That's why.
Thanks for listening to the Disrupt the Everyday podcast. For more ways to listen, connect with us on social media. To be a guest or to partner with us, check out our link tree at Disrupt the Everyday. Join us next time for more ways to disrupt the everyday.